often in the culture today we hear about crisis of, say, masculinity and these sorts of things. And I have to say, sometimes I look at the culture and I think maybe it's just a culture of a crisis of maturity, perhaps. And I think our speaker today will be able to speak to this. Let's welcome our guest for the day. Give it up for Keith Hayward. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's get started. Adulthood is not aging well. That's the first line of my book. Basically, my argument in the book is that we're living in a culture that is debased by primacy of youth, where grown men and women seem to have lost the competency of being adults. And likewise, at the same time, children show a knowingness and an awareness that's well beyond their years. So when I wrote this book, my goal was to explain how this disquieting and rather strange reversal has come about, and what, if anything, we can do about it. So I'm going to start with a few examples. Now, I start with a caveat. This book is written about America and the United Kingdom. So please don't think I'm talking about Hungarian society. Perhaps we can talk about that after in the Q&A. So some examples. Well, the first thing, if you live in the UK, is you'll be surrounded at every turn by kind of a confetti of health and safety signage, telling you how to use a staircase, to stay hydrated on a hot day. I don't know about you, but I got 50 years old, and I realized when it was hot, you should drink some water. I don't need to be told by a tannoy speaker patronizing me at every turn how to use a staircase, etc., etc. So it's everywhere, this kind of infantilizing dynamic. A trip to the cinema today is no longer about adult stories and complex narratives and ambiguous endings that you have to make sense of yourself. It's like going to a toy shop, all right? It's superheroes, it's spandex reboot movies, it's young adult movies, it's cartoons, it's comic books. This is the staple of our filmic culture. So instead of this complex movies of the older times, we now live in a world where films function as reassuring bedtime stories, safe, familiar fairy tales that can be told over and over again in a bid to lull us all to a comfortable sleep. It's in our built environment, it's in our architecture, a mix of Legoland aesthetic and postmodern irony. Nothing is serious, everything is ugly and childish, it's impermanent, it won't date. Compare this to the architecture of Budapest, okay? Inspiring, uplifting, timeless. We have to live in a world now in the UK and the US where our architecture looks like we're in a romper room full of Lego bricks. It would be reassuring to think that high art would be different from popular culture. But unfortunately, our highest arts are also awash with this infantile dynamic. Jeff Koons, the world's most expensive artist, his art is an insipid, soulless toy art. The Tate Modern at the top here has 5 or 6 rooms which reflect eras in British culture. You go through the rooms of bygone eras, you hear talk of metaphysics, community, work, labor, family. When you get to the room that reflects our times in Britain, this is what you see, this room here, an adult romper room. Okay, something that's akin to a sort of soft play area for adult children. This is, of course, all exemplified by Banksy. Banksy is Britain's most famous artist in history, according to several publications. Banksy, of course, constantly uses children in everything he does. All right, children have this innocence that he likes to roll out into his politics. His politics, however, is not good. It's infantilized. He has childlike pedestrian homilies that are lapped up by subversive street politics, by middle-class pseudo-rebels who can't be bothered to engage in actual critical thinking. You get the art your culture deserves. At 23, Michelangelo carved from a solid block of marble the Madonna della Pieta, a work so awe-inspiring it triggered the High Renaissance. Who do we get as the artist of our time? Cold War Steve. a graduate of Nuneaton Art College who uses his iPhone to Photoshop celebrities from newspaper columns and puts them into his work and then bundles them up and sells them, fittingly perhaps, in children's jigsaw puzzles and children's book animals. Like I say, you get the art your society demands. And you can do this in any walk of life. Any area you wish to look at, pretty much, you will find it has been infantilized. The infantilization of everything, from publishing, bookstores, every book has a cartoon cover. In fashion, there's subcategories, kidcore, tween, all about bringing down, debasing our culture and making us walk around cities looking like big children in romper suits. Even sport has become infantilized. Pickleball is one large LARP, live action replay event. It's a shrunken court, the way the wiffle ball absorbs all the shock and kills all the pace. It's tennis, but safer, stunted, leisure disguised as strenuous activity. It is, as Jonathan Meade says in this quote, a kind of overwhelming cultural trend and tendency that you can identify almost anywhere. So what exactly is infantilization? Well, the word infants means historically, before one can speak, before you're able to articulate something. However, there's also a clinical root to the word infantile or infantilized. And that clinical root means a regressive psychology, so that you're not mature enough for your period of your age, akin to your age. Now, I like to take the word infantilized and infantile out of the clinical setting and do what Christopher Lasch did many years ago for narcissism, which was to wrest it away from psychiatry and look at narcissism, and in my case, infantilism, in a cultural context. It's a process that's been underway for a number of decades. It has resulted in a general debasement of our culture as beauty, erudition, tradition, and respect are replaced by something crasser, more superficial and unsubstantial. It gets more complicated. It's not simply about staying younger longer. Also occurring at the same time is the concept of adultification. Because we've undermined adulthood and rejected it as a kind of place to look for wisdom and knowledge, we have to find it elsewhere. And where do we find it? In the supposed sagacity and wisdom of the child, a la Banksy, if you like. Anglo-American society has been forced to look elsewhere for its moral guidance. And so we have, for the first time, what anthropologists call a neoncratic society, which is that children at the very top of the pyramid going down to the elders. This is the exact reverse of all human history previously. There are major problems that occur when you start treating children as adults. And this is a serious issue because, like some of these images suggest, what you're creating is half adults and half children. And so you start to treat them in the same way. How might that manifest itself? Well, the World Health Organization, in its documentation, says that children should be taught about sexual activity from birth. Okay? We have the medicalization of childhood disorders, which previously would have been seen as bad behavior, unruly behavior. Now it's medicalized, as it would be for an adult, with very serious mind-altering drugs that are administered on a massive scale across American and British society. All this infantilization, working at the same time as adultification, creates what I call representational life stage dissolution. Adults staying younger longer, children growing older quicker. What happens is a merging process that makes it increasingly difficult for many young people to differentiate and disassociate themselves from the generation immediately above them, and indeed vice versa. Now, many years ago, the psychologist Erik Erikson talked about something called an identity crisis, his term. An identity crisis occurs when you do not have an oppositional dynamic between different stages in the life course. So it's your job to be a rebellious teenager, and it's your job as a parent to understand that and distance yourself from that alleged rebellion. When these oppositional behaviors, these oppositional attitudes, these oppositional dynamics break down, Erikson said your individuals are heading for an identity crisis. Now, there are some kind of non-serious implications about this. So, for example, Halloween, 2 decades ago, this was a children's-only holiday. Now, adult Halloween costumes outsell children's costumes by the tune of $500 million. So these are kind of unserious issues. You might talk about Taylor Swift's fans, their mothers and their daughters all going to the same concert. When I was a kid, I would have killed myself rather than go to a concert with my parents arriving with me. You get the idea. So those are unserious issues, but actually there are some very, very serious implications, okay? The school-to-prison pipeline in America, where children are in school, they do a small misdemeanor, and yet they're involved in the criminal justice system. All kinds of serious implications flow from this life stage dissolution. So what would we get? We get what I call generational mulch. Now, generational mulch is where people share the same experiences, behaviors, attitudes, language, etc. I was recently asked by Cosmopolitan magazine, the women's magazine, to talk about infantilization of sex toys and why sex toys no longer look like phalluses, they look like everything else, ponies, rainbows, etc. And I said, well, listen, you're only getting half the story. You may be infantilizing sex toys, but what you're also doing, what the manufacturers are also doing, is they're making those toys appeal to younger people. So you're adultifying sex toys at the same time, creating this generational mulch, this experiential dynamic. Now, what's causing this? All right. Now, I want to point out to lots of young people here, many of you are very young, seems to me, and that's fabulous, that it's not your fault, okay? It's not your fault. It's done by design, or it's done because of a lack of oversight by the adults who should be helping to shape your development. It's not your fault. I'm not having a go at you, okay? So what is causing all this? Well, my book is 400 pages long, has lots and lots of stories in it, lots of history in it, which maybe I'm going to skip over today. And I'm going to talk about 3 causes of infantilization. There are others. Let's take a look at the 3 main ones. The first one is the infantilization that's driving contemporary advertising, okay? Here's a good example of this, where adults are given childhood voices, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is done by design. This is not something that's accidental, okay? When you turn your TV on, your computer screen on today, you're being treated, in the words of advertisers and marketers, as if you were a child. In fact, the term they use is adult-child consumer. Now, Benjamin Barber wrote a book about this and talked about the infantilist ethos, and he was deliberately setting that up in opposition to the Protestant ethos. The Protestant ethos is about work, hard work, self-denial, etc., etc. Get rid of all the Protestant ethic in our culture and replace it with infantilist ethos. I need it now. I want it now. It's neophilia. I must have the new thing. I won't delay gratification. I will demand these things now. So this is called the uni-age. I often refer to it as the uni-age has come, all right? And it's controlled infantilization. You can see this advert here. The Milky Bar is a candy bar in the UK. For 50 years, it always used a child, because they were selling to children. Now, of course, they've replaced the child with an adult. Now, if I had more time, I could tell you more about the advertising's practices, but suffice it to say that they use techniques that are well established in the marketing and advertising domain. One is toyification, replacing adult things, adult objects with toys with memories of childhood. Secondly is cartoonification. Cartoonification of everything, actually, but including adult products and services. Now, I can't imagine my father responding very well to this cartoon advert here, which is about thermostat control by British Gas. Why are they advertising to us in this way? If the sound was playing, you would be bombarded with absurdly infantile jingles and music. In Great Britain, our hapless government recently passed a assisted dying bill, which I'm morally totally opposed. However, when you spend as much time as me watching these adverts, you sometimes think, well, maybe it's not a bad way out to go now rather than to have to continue to be bombarded by this infantilist trash. I'm going to move a little bit quickly through this. The second main driver, I believe, of an infantilized world is our online fixation, okay? As Julia Twench points out in her book here behind me, young people are replacing real-life activities with online behavior. What does that mean? It means that things that people used to do that would mark the transition to adulthood, learning to drive, volunteer work, part-time jobs, etc., are all being dropping off in terms of their use, and they're being replaced by online behaviors, online relationships. Now, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because many papers at this event have talked about online culture. But in terms of the relationship between online culture and infantilism specifically, the key things are safetyism, narcissism, and fantasy. What do I mean by that? Well, safetyism is the idea that you're not prepared to take any more risks. You want to exist in a very controlled, safe environment. It's not just physical safety, it's emotional safety. I don't even want to be challenged from my views. You retreat inside your highly curated world. This can, in fact, then lead to the elongation of fantasy. We all fantasize. We all have sexual fantasies. We're going to win the lottery. Fantasy is a good thing for human beings. However, lots of fantasies should drop off as you get older. And that happens as you interact with real-life activity and with other members of society. They kind of tell you your fantasies need to be scaled back a little bit. And that's actually a very good thing. Guess what? That doesn't happen online, where fantasies are propagated. There's an architecture of support that will allow infantile, narcissistic desires and fantasies to continue. And you can see this everywhere, okay? The uptake of transmutability of identity, all right, which if I had more time, I could talk about that. All right, well, the third driver is education. One would have hoped that our schools and our universities would have pushed back against the rising tide of culturally induced infantilization. Unfortunately, in America and the UK, they've contributed to it. In fact, you could argue they're largely the biggest seedbed of infantilization, with their therapeutic turn, with their pedagogy of motivation, with socialization in reverse, which is always to give students what they want, not necessarily what they need. This is the longest chapter in the book because I'm surrounded by academics, and they all send me their evidence of this. So if you're interested in this, you're in the education sector, I'd advise you take a look at that paper. What are the consequences, the last minute or two, of all this? Well, there's many consequences. I haven't got time to go into them. I'm going to pick one, which is the political sphere, perhaps because it's the most important. So we have now what I call the infantocracy, okay? People talk about a grown-up politics or an adult politics. Exactly the opposite has happened. Now, you'll say straight away, oh, it's Trump. Trump is the big infantocrat. But everybody, it seems, is an infantocrat these days. From Trudeau to this is the mayor of Boston, Massachusetts, uploading a TikTok dance at the very moment there was a migration crisis in downtown Boston. And here, this is the leader of the third biggest political party in the UK, Ed Davey. He speaks to his voters via TikTok videos. And you can see the iconography, the symbolism. This is extremely infantilizing stuff. So what you're getting is the kind of what I call the de-imperialization of political quality. Weber in 1919 talked about grace, charisma, authority, all those things that make politicians identifiable and garner our support. What do we have here, right? We have the superheroization of our political class. These are all elected officials in America. I'm not entirely sure what they're doing, really. It's some kind of superheroization dance that they're involved in. It's a huge phenomenon, and on it goes. If I had more time, we could talk about this. It's not just about laughing at infantocratic politicians, although it's quite fun to do that, I think you'll all agree, right? They deserve everything they get. Actually, there's something much more deeper and serious going on here, which I call kind of cutesy authoritarianism. The idea here, unstated but clearly active, is that through cutesy authoritarianism or patrician infantilization, the goal is to replace the individuals, the adult autonomy of us all, with a form of governance that views individuals, that views us as passive, childlike actors who must be constantly watched over by security and surveillance, lest they think independently and go against the grain of the ruling technocratic authorities. So, to conclude, what can we do about this? So the good news is the last chapter of my book provides 10 rules for a more adult society. And there you'll find my prescriptions for how we can dig our way out of the bottom of the playpen that we're all in this contemporary cultural romper room. And perhaps if we have some time in the Q&A, we can explore some of those prescriptions that I have for helping us rebuild an adult society, and very importantly, rebuild adult politics. Because we're here today to look into the next 25 years of the future about what the world's going to look like. If we continue along the same line of travel that we're on, with infantocratic rulers that treat us as children and act themselves as children, I'm not even sure we'll be here in 25 years. It's an urgent message I'm giving you today to rebuild adult society and throw out your childish passions and interests, if indeed you have them. Thanks a lot. That's my time.
All right, thank you very much, Keith. I mean, that was fantastic. We've actually got a hot seat.
Yeah.
Sit in for this.
I would describe this as slightly infantilized.
I was worried.
I'm not entirely sure I should be going in here. All right, but I'm a good sport, if nothing else.
So who's got questions? Put your hand up very high. I'll pick the question. Go ahead, please.
I think politicians have a lot to do with this infantilization stuff, because if people get instructions all the time and they are always told what to do, then they won't learn how to think for themselves. Like, as you mentioned, the safety signs, or like how to use the staircase and stuff. And obviously, they will be easier to control because they won't be able to live on their own. So what do you think about that?
It's an observation more than a question. I think you're right is the answer to that, so make it nice and easy for you. So my day job is a criminologist. So what I do most of my time is write about crime and study crime. And one of the things I've been writing about in the last year or so is the rise and the growth of urban smartness, or smart cities. And I believe that smart cities are actually being devised precisely for the kind of controlling tendencies that you're articulating. I think the goal of a smart city is to make sure that we're extremely passive. At every turn, we're controlled by biometric security, by drones, much bigger than the one that was flying around here. They can stay up there for months. They can see everything. They can record everything. So the idea is that it's like being in parallel with being a baby inside a crib with a baby monitor that your parents look at downstairs. We're all going to be inside a big crib called society, or the smart city, and we're going to be watched by the baby monitor, by the technocratic and governmental overlords. So, yes, I agree with everything you said.
Thank you. The guy in the great hat.
Oh, yeah.
I am amazed by what you said. Like, you just rolled out what I usually say to my students. I am a teacher at SFA. It's the University of Cinema.
Yeah.
And therefore, like, we deal with audiovisuals. And the audiovisuals are, well, as you look behind yourself, you will see what's going on. Well, it's only the visuals, and I actually teach visual language, by the way. Yeah. We're living in a postmodern, nihilistic society, and on top being infantilized, as you said. Now, how do we go back and actually communicate, your concepts to the new generation when we don't have anybody, any artist left that is actually able to produce something that has a classic thought? I come from Rome, so I know something about classic thought. And so, my idea is to, is to create a new generation of filmmakers who based their philosophy on a classic thought rather than postmodern nihilistic one that then, leads to what we are seeing, we're experiencing now. But what do you think?
Good for you, sir. I think that today it's very unfashionable to like classical tropes, classical architecture, classical film. Everything has to be new, modern, the latest thing that comes down the pipe. And actually, there's so much. You're better off as a young person possibly looking back into, certainly in film, for example, back into the archives, back into history as the guide to the future, rather than what's actually around at the moment. We're living in a post-literate world, so I think what you're doing is important. We have to have filmic representations of serious tropes, adult tropes, so I'm all for that. And what I would say, I give some hope to you. There's some data that shows that if you give young people rubbish to watch, and you give the same cohort something that's much more serious, significant, and well-made and engaging, they all choose this. They get this because that's what they're fed, and that's what the machinery of social media provides for them. And it's addictive. It's a dopamine hit. Yesterday we heard from Martin Stransky about this, not just a reimagining of our subjectivity, but a rewiring of our brains, because of what we're watching and what we're stimulated by. That can be changed. And I believe in young people, I teach them every day, that if you push them, as you seem to be doing in your new body of work, if you push them, they'll respond. And that's where the hope is. If you want my hope for 25 years forward, it's not in our generation, and certainly not in the infantocratic generation that rule us now. It's in you and your students. So I wish you the very best of luck.
Make it very, very succinct, very short.
If you think way smaller, I mean, not in a society level, but in like a family level, do you think that the reduced hierarchy between a parent and the children contributes to this phenomena? And with this question, I'm not saying that it's good to have like a strong hierarchy between a parent and the children. I'm just curious.
Okay.
Okay, and can we just take one more to join it up? Is there another question short? This chap here, very quickly, very quickly.
How would you define adulthood? And what's the main distinction between adulthood and childhood?
Okay.
Thank you.
30 seconds to do these two questions is not going to be easy, right?
Sure,
let me take this one first because it's in my memory first. So I think I mentioned Christopher Lasch in my talk, who was a great hero of mine. And after he wrote his book on cultural narcissism, he wrote a book called Hayward in a Heartless World. And all he said in the early 80s was that the family is quite a good support structure to raise children. That's all he said. And history, of course, would say he's right, because thousands of generations have done precisely that. He was absolutely hammered by everybody on the left and the right who had dismissed him as a paleo-conservative, all right? But all he was saying was, actually, come on, it's quite a good way of sharing the workload. It doesn't matter who does the work at home or who does the work in employment terms. The family unit is something that's quite valuable. And I think, actually, that's probably not a bad message to go forward with. It doesn't have to be stereotypical and classically nuclear, but people need to recognize the value of kind of the family and support because you get advice from the generation above and vice versa. You're not all existing on the same cultural plane. Adulthood, how long have we got? Okay,
well.
I would say not long.
No.
I would say the ability to think for yourself and not to be effortlessly and easily manipulated and coerced and influenced. Children at Christmas scream and bang their fists because they want stuff. And they have to learn that life isn't always going to go in the direction that you want. You have to be mature about your choices and your future life. So I think the ability not to be influenced, coerced, manipulated by mass media, by social media, but to actually be your own critical thinker. Many years ago, before the internet, people like Neil Postman and Joshua Meyerowitz said, when the electronic world comes in, and they said this in the 80s, the most important thing to do is to teach our young children to be their own critical authors, to be their own critical editors. Nobody cared what they said, they ignored them. The exact opposite happened. We let the kids loose in an uncurated world of online everything, without the resources, without the critical and mature faculties to be their own critical editors. So being an adult means I'm the person that can decide about what's appropriate, when or not, or how I could be addicted to something, to make those decisions. I think that, it's not an easy thing to do these days, but something we should cling to. Is that okay? Yeah.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, I'm afraid we're out of time. Let's thank Keith Hayward. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question. Thank you.